Okay, so welcome everyone. Just like to remind you that we are being broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings. If you can ensure your mobile phones are muted, and to remind you that no recording or photography is allowed in the meeting. Okay, if you're content, I'll proceed with the agenda. We have got apologies from Stuart Dixon and Sinead McLaughlin, and I think we have some of an indication that Harry will be slightly late, but he will be joining the meeting. Okay, any declarations of interest to declare, members? No. Okay, thank you. So, chairperson's business. So there's one item there, and it's just to advise a copy of the letter from the FMDFM informing the committee of the launch of the competition for the Commissioner for Public Appointments. It can be found in your table pack at page 3, and this was also emailed to members on Monday morning at 7:40 a.m. Obviously up very early. Are members content to note this correspondence? I think there was other correspondence was circulated this week as well around the appointment for the Commissioner, the Irish Language Commissioner, and so I think we maybe need to talk about that in terms of the forward work programme going forward.
Yes, it was on. There was some discussion of it on the radio, and the relevant papers that were being discussed on the radio we emailed to members.
Yes.
They're there on the website for the department, but we just thought because it had been in the news we'd share them with
No,
members.
it was good. Okay, members, just moving on to draft minutes then. So you'll find these on pages 7 to 15 of your table pack. Members, this is because they've been updated following an error in numbering, which was spotted after the main pack was issued, and to reflect that the Finance Committee is the relevant committee for correspondence in relation to the NIAO report on non-domestic renewable heat initiative scheme. So are you content to approve the updated minutes? Yeah.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll go ahead and sign them. So matters arising then. So just want to highlight 2 issues today. So in terms of the draft response to TEO on the draft refugee integration and delivery framework, you'll find some papers in relation to this on pages 25 to 27 of your table pack. So this document is a draft response. The Executive Office, is that to the Executive Office or from? Yes, so from the Executive Office on the refugee integration strategy. So. Yeah, please, we can go talk to it. Yeah.
Yes, so this is a draft that was prepared following the discussion at last week's meeting about so we had a briefing and then members discussed some of the issues after that briefing that they'd like to see reflected in the response. So it's just for members to have a look at that and to see if there's anything additional. It's just a draft. If there's anything additional you'd like to add to that response before it goes off to the department, and if not, then maybe if you're content.
Sorry, yes. Sorry, I thought this was another. No, I'd read that. I thought it was actually fine. I thought it did capture. Hello, Harry. Sorry. Welcome to the meeting. I thought it was fine. Anybody else? Any thoughts on it? No. Okay.
Content to
yes, yeah, I think we're content. Yes, thank you. Okay, so then, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just before we go ahead, that draft response, that paragraphs 2, 3 and 9, just to draw members' attention to that, to say that there are there's kind of 2 forms of words suggested there, note or something slightly stronger, and I'm just wondering, do you have any views about whether?
I think we need to do it stronger than note, Roisin.
Yeah, there's 2 versions, so
yeah.
If you're content, we'll do the second version all the way through.
Yes.
Yes? Perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the other matter then is the draft response to the Committee for Finance on TEO's budget 2025-26. So I would refer you to pages 17 to 24 of the table pack and advise you that this is a departmental response to the Committee's request for a briefing on TEO's budget for 2025-26. The Committee for Finance is content to allow our committee an additional week to consider this material and to formulate its response. Will we have the discussion now? Do you want, you'd mentioned it before the meeting started, do you want to?
Thank you very much, Paul. A couple of things just to raise from it, and it's to get more information really. So the Maze Long Cache, there's £1 million in there. It's for health and safety issues. Yes, I understand updating fire alarms, emergency light, things like that. But it'd be to drill into the detail of that. Now I do know the committee is visiting the site, and it'd be interesting to hear what their feedback is from the site, and to know what the £1 million has been spent on. Communities in transition, this is something I raised before, there's £1.4 million associated with it. I got a list of everybody that was successful last year. The geographical spread in that, I think, is very limited. There's, I'm thinking of North Antrim, my area in particular, where we've had a heavy focus from the paramilitary task force. None of them have made the cut. There's communities there wanting to transition away and they need some support for community work. So I'd like to understand more on how them communities are targeted and why they're selected. Good Relations 2.7 million. We've heard over the past couple of weeks about, you know, dealing and integration into your communities. I would like to know, is this money, is there a lot of it earmarked just to pass on to councils, or will this, the TEO be taking the lead on running projects across the country? And last thing then, Intertrade UK is something I've raised a number of times in the chamber. There's no money associated from it from Stormont. I think that is a big failing, and it'd be interesting to know, was there any bids submitted for Intertrade UK, and if there wasn't, why not?
Okay, thank you. I just want to pick up on the point around the communities in transition. So when the First Minister and Deputy First Minister were here, I think it was September, October time, I had asked about phase 3 because the last piece of research, as far as I can remember, was in 2016, and it was then that they defined what areas would get the funding, and they should be moving into phase 3 by now to actually look at where there's been a shift, because there's none in South Belfast where the riots were last summer. So as you say, you know, the focus needs to change and they haven't come back on that. So I think that that's maybe something we need to be looking, get them back in again on. But I agree with you in terms of the other stuff. The Good Relations, I think we're waiting for the review of TBUC. So again, you know, if there's funding allocated for Good Relations, on what basis when
You understand what that money's been spent on?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so NDP pressures of 1.27 million. It doesn't say which ALBs it's referring to. So I'm assuming it's for the national insurance increase, but I don't know. If you could ask, and then again, their staff costs, are they the same? So it's talks about of all business critical posts so it's allowed for a 5% increase. Is that on top of the annual increment, or is it something separate? I know we're going to come on to this later, but it talks also about financial transactions capital. So it says that DOF is currently progressing amendments to the Financial Provisions Bill. So it talks about FTZ to the relevant lead departments, namely DOF and DFE. I'm nearly sure that DFC use the Financial Transactions Capital for co-ownership. So if we could just check that out, because it seems a lot for just 2 departments. And again, the Good Relations 2.7 million. Now it does talk about district councils, but where does that sit in terms of the Community Relations Council as well? Is any of this money for it? Thank you.
I suppose I'd like to add, in terms of the capital Dell there. Sorry, you were finished, weren't you? Yeah. No?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back at the very end about ending violence against women and girls.
Go ahead now.
So, it talks about £1 million for more sectoral support for organisations supporting women and girls, and it's not to be critical of the work that the group's done around policy. It's been a really good piece of work, but I would like to see more grassroots groups' involvement, certainly groups from working class areas, because even working, I went to an event on Saturday with young girls, and they've heard of this, but they don't know what it means, and I think it would be really helpful just to see what reach it'll have, because these are young girls and they don't even know. Like a big government strategy, you'd like them to fully appreciate it and what it means for them. So, thank you.
Anybody else? Well, can I just raise the issue there? It might be a typo, but it says they're under trust recovery accommodation leases, 1.5 million. So I don't. So I'd like a wee bit of detail on that. You'd maybe buy a property for that. So that's one that I want a bit more information on. And what was the other one? The rights, language and identity. So obviously we're out to recruitment at the minute, but I'm just, by the time that process goes forward, whether they're confident enough that they will require that amount of money within this coming financial year. Anybody else? Any other queries? Maybe we could send. No. Okay. Okay, members, thank you for that. We'll be back on with the agenda.
Are you asking them to come to committee to answer some of them, or is it a written brief, or what?
At the moment, I will take away these things and put them together in a draft, and you can look at it this week. When I get out of here, I'll ask if officials can come next week to address some of those. If not, then I'll ask them to expedite a written answer, but I will request officials to come to address those next week. They may not be in a position because of the shortness of notice, but I will certainly ask.
Okay. Go ahead, please, Brian.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'd be interested just also to get details of what's meant by civil contingencies. Just 580,000. I mean, is that a contingency pot in case there's unrest or whatever, or is it for certain programs? Is it actually committed? So just
We call them from
detail on that.
COVID. Karen Pearce is in. She's responsible for civil contingencies.
Could that be the headroom they're
Could
building
be.
up?
Could be. Don't know. We could ask her.
Yeah.
So, is this for specific programs,
Or is it funding kept in reserve, whatever?
or is it a pot? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So you've got all the comments
I have
then.
all the comments.
Right. Thank you. So we'll move on now to our first oral evidence session. It's the Programme for Government Consultation Report, Quality Impact Assessment, Rural Needs Impact Assessment and Child Rights Impact Assessment, and you'll find these all in your pack, members.
Just give the witnesses.
Yes. Okay. Just. Good afternoon, ladies. It's lovely to see you back at committee. Really appreciate you coming for us today and for providing us with the papers in advance of the meeting. Would you like to make any opening remarks?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and it's good to be back. And I think we have a focus on the equality documents today in the consultation report. If I can just introduce Christine, who wasn't here with us last week, so Louise was here,
Yes,
I
thank you.
remember. So just a few introductory comments. So the Programme for Government was agreed in draft on the 5th of September, launched for consultation on the 9th of September, with an 8-week consultation on the draft and a 12-week consultation on 3 draft impact assessments, and the consultations concluded in November and December respectively. The responses that came into us were analysed by TEO and NISRA officials, and a consultation report was then prepared for ministerial consideration. And as I said last week, Chair, we were absolutely bowled over by the amount of responses we had. It was brilliant. And just to put the figures on record again, 1,390 responses were received from organisations and individuals to the draft PFG, and some of those were also relevant to the impact assessments, and then we received a further 30 responses specifically relating to the impact assessment documents. Some of the issues that we were very mindful of at an early stage, following the consultation process, targets were introduced into the draft, as well as annual objectives which will be updated each year and aligned to our budget. So respondents were keen that information on measurements and delivery is made available to the public. That's something else that came through. And as well as targets that we've added, We also made some changes to what's included in the PFG, such as a commitment to take action to address poverty, and we've reflected the reality of our ageing population. So it's important to note that while certain issues were raised during the consultation, there was considerable support for what was already in there, and you can see the stats in the consultation report that gives an indication of that. So the executive ministers met to discuss consultation findings on the 21st of November, and a robust process was then followed after between TEO and all departments. Departments sent amendments to us, which came with ministerial clearances, and a revised draft was shared with the executive ministers on the 21st of February, and a further revised draft was shared on the 26th of February, and obviously then signed off on the 27th and approved by the Assembly on Monday the 3rd of March. So that's been the history. So the programme for government was then made public, and the equality documents were as well. The programme could not be declared final until it was discussed and agreed by the Executive and approved by the Assembly. It was published on the NI Executive website on the afternoon of Monday 3rd of March. Alongside this was the consultation report, the revised equality, child rights and rural needs impact assessments. So they're the documents I think you have today, Chair. We had engaged with the Equality Commission at various points, and we took our lead from them and our own TEO equality schemes when developing the equality impact assessment and the other documents. And I think a point you might want to touch on with us is, because it's a programme for government for the whole executive, we had to try to capture the overall picture of what the programme for government was trying to do, and that's going to be quite difficult. But as I said last week, and as DFM said in closing on the 3rd of March, we do expect that departments will lead on the delivery of the actions that fall to them. So we met with the Equality Commission, we met with the Commissioner for Children and Young People, and we've got Louise, who will be able to help us with equality, and Christine will be able to help us with rural and children if we get into those documents in detail. But as I say, we're still going to expect departments to do delivery, and with that goes the responsibilities that they have for equality as well. Trying to bring it all together will be the art. So the First Minister and Deputy First Minister have also been clear that the PFG is not the totality of the Executive's ambitions, it's not the totality of everything that's happening in departments. So we know that some people and some organisations will be disappointed that they're not seen in here. We have to look at the totality of what's being done across government to get the full picture. It's only with us at this point because the 4 executive parties have agreed on prioritisation, and that's where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Ladies, have you anything to add at this stage?
No, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And the documents are very comprehensive that sit behind the actual programme for government document that most people will have seen. And so we'll just commend you, Karen, and your team for pulling everything together. I think it's very, very comprehensive. And I think some of the public discourse or conversation this week, I think, has been false and misplaced in terms of some of the criticism, because I do think that it's a good document. So I think you should be proud of the work you have done in this space. And just to address some of that, I suppose, Karen, it would be useful if you could give us an indication of how you have worked across the departments, not just within TEO, to work with the ministers, their special advisors and their senior officials in terms of the content of the report and how you've analysed and reflected the consultation, please.
Okay. I would also like just to thank Michael Kennedy, who's led on this work for us, and he's not here today, but he led the team in a huge amount of engagement with departments all the way through. So that was at official level, and some meetings were with ministers.
I think the meetings with ministers were at the early end of the process. Materials that came back to us later in the process went through their ministers, but our meetings were more so with officials, and possibly occasionally special advisors.
So it was part of the ethos that this was going to be as inclusive as we possibly could across NICs, because how else would you get to an agreed PFG? Got to do it that way. So I think the team, if I may say so, put a lot of effort into that, Chair.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. So I think you had referenced there that you were very pleased with the response, and I wonder, I might have missed it, but in terms of geographic response, you know, are you content that there weren't parts that were disproportionately responding or disproportionately not responding? Are you content that, you know, you've got a good glimpse of thoughts and on the programme for government across the province? Thanks.
Yes, I think so. And if we look at where the consultation events were held in person, so we had 7 in-person events: Belfast, Lisbon, Ballymena, Newry, Derry, Londonderry and Skilling and Cookstown. So there was a definite focus on getting as far around as we could. Then we had, I think, 205 people attend. Sorry, just on those in-person events, Chair, we had 194 people attend those with us. We had 205 people attend online events with us, which was again very, very welcome. And then a large number of people participated in the consultation. So I hope we got as far around as we could. It was certainly designed to be that way.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose the last one for me is in relation to targets and demonstrating output, and I appreciate you've got the wellbeing dashboard, but I suppose maybe just in terms of hard outputs at the far end, are you content that the framework's in place to demonstrate progress on those, and that at the end of this programme for government you'll be able to definitively say what has been delivered on the programme for government?
That's the phase we're in now.
Okay.
We touched on it last week and had hoped to be able to maybe give a feel for it today, but I can't. Sorry, we need a bit more time on that. But demonstrating delivery is exactly what our ministers want to see. That they don't want this to be a dry document that just has some words on it. This has got to make change, and they will want to be able to see what's been done across all of the departments with targets to meet. So we need to do that. From an equality perspective as well, we've got ways that we can keep an eye on what's happening in that space too. And then the wellbeing framework that you mentioned, that will be updated as and when official statistics come in that are relevant to the indicators and domains. So that will change all the time. But I think Matthew last week drew the committee's attention to where that document can be found in public. We want people to be interested and to having a look. Now, some of those indicators will not change quickly. So it's going to be, I think, a combination of those things: measuring hard outcomes, keeping an eye on the equality issues and the wellbeing framework. But that they all serve different purposes. So I think it's important that we see those for what they are, and we will be able to give the committee some information on targets and measures, but we're just not there yet.
Thank you very much. Harry, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good to see you again. Good to see the responses there, and as the Chair said about the geographical divide was well represented. And looking at your numbers, 1,390, I was just thinking, you did say a brilliant response. I take it that meant that the responses were all good, but I was just wondering how many of those would have been negative responses?
I don't think we can say they were all good. There were lots of concerns and issues raised during the consultation. I think there was broad support, and especially when you look at the agreement rates against different elements, the priorities, the missions, there was a lot of support for what was there. But I think we also received plenty of feedback about the issues and concerns that people had, some of which is addressed, not necessarily all of it. It varies on how much, the same issue came up time and again. Some of those things were able to be taken on board by the executive, some of them were not.
In the interest of transparency, you can find the percentages in this document, the analysis of responses. So for each section, it will tell you how many people were strongly agree, don't know, disagree. So we've put that information out there if people want to have a look at it.
See it. No, that's very good. And I mean, that was a good point that the programme for government's not totality, it's just prioritisation.
That's correct.
I think that's good. And also, I mean, the dashboard was mentioned, so it means things may look at where they're going, how fast, you know, I think that's a good pointer as well. But, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Carol, please.
Thank you. So I try to look in the documents, so if it's here, if you could steer me to it, I'd really appreciate it. But where it actually said as part of the equality impact assessment, which section 75 groups would be more disadvantaged or deprived, and it's not here. I couldn't find it.
I think the response coming back, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that our expectation out of the equality impact assessment is that it will have a positive impact across all section 75 groups, or across equality between different breakdowns. Where I think there was one instance where the respondents disagreed, or not disagreed, but said that they thought they'd have no impact for marital status. But across the others, they expected positive impact as well.
So it's, for me, it doesn't look like a full EQIA, because and that may be something that's done later because it's not a final document, as you say. But I mean, we already have data to say that there are inequalities, but yet on page 164, I'm trying to find it here. It just says the data has been selected to provide a snapshot of possible inequalities that may exist. So that's why it doesn't feel like a full EQIA, because it's selective data rather than the data that come out of a full EQIA. And I know it sounds very technical, but for me, it doesn't reflect the systemic inequalities that are already there, particularly for 75 groups.
I think for the document itself, because it's covering so much, I think where you get the inequalities will be in the departmental specific work on that.
And that's something, Karen, that could maybe come later?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that will be iterative, because it depends what are they delivering and when.
Yeah.
So for some departments, they're already shovel ready. For childcare, for instance, they're already doing it. So that would be different. Could I just respond on one point? So I thought it was interesting that there were so many impact screening, quality documents that we could reference in this. It's a rich source of information.
It is.
It's good.
No, I agree, and I went on to a lot of the links. And I mean, the dashboard, for example, is, you know, helpful. It's still under construction. It's not a finished piece of work. But you've also recognised, like for example, in justice, there won't be any data on that. But I certainly know that it'll come down to each department, because, like for example, some of the feedback in the document said that, for example, under identity, people from LGBTQI plus community felt that because they weren't mentioned, that they're not reflected in the programme for government. So that will happen. You'll get different departments who will have to match these targets against output and delivery. And I think maybe at that stage, the department or one of the departments, but I imagine it'll be TO because they're responsible, I would like to see them ask from each of the departments onto those categories where they delivered and where they didn't, and match it against the current inequalities that are there. Because it does look like a very positive document. I think it's positive that we have one after 13 years, but it just, you know, representing an area that's one of the most deprived, I just feel I need to look out for my constituents and others within the top 10 of the most deprived, and the detail that I'd be looking for to see if they're getting serviced or not just isn't there at the minute.
At a high level, as Louise says, it's our hope and aspiration that the PFG makes things better. But we did recognise, I'm not going to be able to find it, but there is wording in the documentation somewhere that recognises that we have inequalities. We're not trying to skirt over that. And I know you weren't suggesting that.
No, I'm not.
We did then say, there could be some adverse impacts, and it's in page 54. I don't know what page it would be on your table pack, but it looks like that, where we did have a go at trying to see what that might look like. So I think a genuine attempt to address what you've just said, and as you say, there'll be more work coming along at departmental level.
But if that could be fed back, Karen, because
Yes,
it's a real concern. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Carol. Claire, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Karen. Appreciate you coming back to the committee. I suppose I kind of want to pick up on the theme that I had talked in relation to last week. I suppose both in the first one being around data and the data we collect and how that impacts even on how we approach equality. Interestingly for me, after my comments last week, I had a number of groups and organisations and people contact me to suggest that, the data isn't there, and I know you disagreed with that. So I think maybe we're perhaps disagreeing on the type of data that exists, and that's fine. But I think in terms of taking opportunities, even from that, how can we improve what we're collecting and what we need to know? Because to an extent, we only know what we know. We don't know what we don't. And I think that's essentially what the point I was trying to get to. I think even to give an example around the ending violence against women and girls, how many of the victims are 55 plus, which is a specific age group, and are we then approaching how we support those victims in the right way? When people are presenting to hospitals, what data are we collecting there in relation to the type of age group and that type of thing? I do think it's something that we could do better in Northern Ireland, and I suppose even my comments last week were in relation to I'm not sure it was the Innovation Fund, but the money that exists there to see how we can do things better. And my second point is around the ageing population, and I do appreciate that that's now being talked about very specifically within the Programme for Government, because the Good Friday Agreement, within the Programme for Government. But how are we going to monitor that? And I suppose try and ensure that we are taking it into account, as even if it's part of the wellbeing dashboard, or are we looking at it in another way, projections or things like that. So thank you.
I think the position Matthew and I took last week was, as you described, we do think there's a lot of data. If that has left us with gaps, and if you're hearing of specific concerns, you mentioned some last week, if you've heard other things during the week, please let us know, and we'll see if we've got it. But we have to continue to say we're data rich, because we think we are. It was the Transformation Fund that we were talking about last week as well. And
I appreciate you probably have a lot of data, but for me it should nearly be about the type of data rather than the quality rather than quantity. Like Alzheimer's groups, that type of thing, demonstrating where the problems actually are, putting kind of the meat to the bones. It's not just about numbers, it's about, I suppose, what the actual data is. That's kind of the feedback I'm getting. So, it's not about how much you have, it's about what you have, if you know what I mean. So, I'd ask, is to take that back and reflect on that, because I really don't think I'm the only person saying it. I know I'm not the only person saying it. So just to...
If you could share with us if you've got any practical examples, just so that we're having the right conversation, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else, Claire?
Just the ageing population.
Ageing population. I was just looking in the wellbeing framework to see if we...
I have here.
You've got it here?
At the minute, 28 of our indicators would break down by age, so they would all obviously be able to look at the ageing population. And then I think they're also looking to develop as many more as possible on age as well, especially for the children's side, to break them down further that way as well. So that's something.
I think you mean that the indicators would...
Oh, sorry, on the dashboard, on the wellbeing dashboard.
How do we then use that and utilise that information so that it's meaningful?
I think that's the point you were making last week, that we've got to start seeing older population not as a segment a population issue, we will take it away and have a talk to the right people about that.
Okay, yeah, because personally I think it nearly needs to be a strategic approach. Just, you know, mindful, similarly to how we would have a trauma-informed approach, we nearly need to have an ageing population approach, because I do think the amount of money you invest will be different depending on what that looks like. So I would love to see some sort of strategy that really focuses on it, rather than just, I suppose, putting it, you know, as words in the PFG. So
Okay, Claire.
all right, thank you.
Thank you. Brian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, attending committee again. And I think we should record our thanks to the, I think it was 1,400, well, not 1,400 people, but the 1,400 responses, many more people involved. So as a committee, I'm sure we would want to record our appreciation. We want participative democracy, you know, and that people respond and express their views, express their criticisms and challenge us, all of us who are MLAs. I do note there was a strong level of support for the 9 priorities, 90% plus, most of them. And the analysis that people felt these were the most significant current issues to be addressed. And as others have said, the PFG does not include everything that government is doing, but as priorities, there seems to be a high level of agreement from those who responded. So 2 questions. One is just a note in the comments that residents often express the desire to understand what actions would be taken to deliver the priorities and when delivery would happen. So will there be a specific report on the PFG? And I know there's the wellbeing dashboard and there's various mechanisms where you have to dig into it a bit to try and find the evidence. Will there be an easy to understand report actually listing, you know, the actions that have resulted specifically on the PFG? And could you say a bit more about the mentions about people, an appetite for clear links between the actions and the PFG, wellbeing domains, and the budget?
Yeah.
And that became a topic of debate. You know, a PFG is a multi-year document. The budgets are currently mostly annual. So there was various commitments which were subject to budget commitments, but what is your analysis of the commitment to connect the PFG to the budget going forward, so people can expect that the priorities will be followed through?
If I could take those in reverse order. Yeah. So I mentioned last week that the budget for next financial year, and I think I might have said to Mr Gaston by mistake 24-25, I meant 25-26, so I apologise. 26-27 is the consultation that closes today, so apologies for that slip. It's more than an aspiration. We think it will work best if it's done that way, by linking the budget. And I think it's in the Northern Ireland Act that we're supposed to try and achieve that on an annual basis. So it's more than an aspiration. But
linked to the programme for government, or
the programme for government arrangements in the Northern Ireland Act, I think, say the executive. It links back to paragraph 20 of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement as well. The executive should try every year to have a programme for government and to link that to the budget. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think that early work on that is starting, but it's something they're going to have to iterate every year with the targets and in terms of the delivery report. I know we don't have detail on how the delivery reporting through the year will go, but the executive have committed to publish a delivery report every year,
which will have the headings of the priorities, the missions, or
I would imagine so. I think it's the only way to make sense of the document. Yes. If you take people back to what we were trying to achieve and what was set out in there by ministers. Just on the committee's thanks to people taking part. Again, we were overwhelmed, but there was a lot of design around this to make sure that the process was inclusive as well as geographically well spread, that people could use online, come in person. Louise said last week if they just wanted to ring us up and tell us what they think, that was okay as well. Emails, just really we would take any form of response people wanted to give us. But we think part of the good figures around that is because the online facility was there. Now it doesn't work for everyone, so that's why we have a blend of ways to engage. But I think for us that was a really important lesson, that the more you put into the design, the more you're going to get out of the consultation.
Just to clarify, when will the first delivery report?
It's an annual report, so I'm going to take a punt and say it will be coming towards the end of the first year of the PFG, but I've not discussed that with ministers.
Financial year, whatever. Or
Yeah, I have not discussed that with ministers, but for me, my advice would be that makes sense.
Okay.
If we try to put one out, say in the summer, what would we be reporting on? There'd be very little to say.
If we could get clarity on that, maybe.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Timothy, please.
Thank you very much, Paula. Thanks very much for coming back again. A couple of things just to pick up on. You said that the programme for government, it being linked to the budget, that's certainly a fundamental key to success going forward, and that needs to be something that we see coming into a rhythm and routine, that they're not two different documents. They need to be sitting together, so then we can see what is actually deliverable in this. And that's one of the things I was probing you on last week, was regarding where's the money coming from. Well, the budget's out of consultation. Want to pick up and start off by asking about the analysis of responses. So we have 7 in-person public consultation events, and that came to 184 people attended in person. Do you have the breakdown of how many people went to each of them?
I think we do.
Yeah, we do. If I could find out how that. This one here.
When you were doing your 10 online events,
Yeah, we have the
Those are-
same breakdown for them.
so then that was getting your picture for the geographical spread to ensure that people were being picked up. What was the least number it went to one of the events, and where was that, and what was the most, just to gain where would be the most?
Okay. Chair, if we just run through this, if that's okay. So Belfast, we had 22 people, Lisbon 22, Ballymena 30, Newry 20, Derry London Derry 18, Enniskillen 72, but we think that was very much driven by health related issues. And then Cookstown 10. The least number of people we had attend an online event was 8. That was towards the end of the process. The highest number we had was 33.
And from that, you were taking the geographical, the age of the people to build that profile that we have.
Not from the online events, no. The geographical comments I made at the top were around the in-person events, but was there anything we could draw from the online ones?
No, except that we made it available on the website that if people wanted another one, we'd put on another one. So I think there wasn't originally 10. There's originally 6 or 7, and we did add them if we could accommodate more people.
Are they booked through Eventbrite, or are they just a case of here's the link, you can join, this is the time it's happening at?
Not sure.
Had to register first for the event, and then you went on through it, so we knew how many people were coming roughly. That's what the way it
Is
worked.
it possible when we're doing something like this in future that we have a geographical catchment, just to give us a picture of what areas are motivated to feed into the process and what ones aren't? I think that would be, as Claire was talking about data, it's something that would be interesting for me to know how many people from Northampton were proactive and fed into the process here.
I think that's a really good idea, and we could almost do it by council district if we were in this situation again. Just tick one box, which council district are you in?
Yeah, something like that, yep.
Yeah.
17,000 has been spent on the consultation.
Yes.
What was that money spent on?
That was spent on predominantly on the in-person events.
Yeah, predominantly in person.
And also printing and document production for that. You would expect me to say this, but I think for the return that we got on the 17,000, we consider that to be good value for money. You see some of these things cost a lot more than that, and to do it for that money I think is fantastic, but that's just where I am.
Yep. So drilling down into it a wee bit more, so over 70 events attended by over 1,500 participants. Looking at the Section 75 categories, we have young people, minority ethnic communities, older people, the LGBTQ plus community, the Irish language community, business, education, disability carers and others. What are the others?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but you have
I have the list, but it's probably just they didn't put every single
like those
type of
bespoke
group.
events for
There was bespoke events for everybody, to be honest with you.
So in this, was that you capturing the data to what section people felt they fitted into, or was it a case of you went out to reach out to these groups proactively to try and get them to engage?
Both. I think we contacted some groups and some groups contacted us and asked us to attend, and so we did.
What groups did you contact?
I think we went out to 20,000 or something like that, like groups. It was
The stakeholder
lists, and also we asked departments if they wanted to send out to their own stakeholders. It was a lot of people.
So was that a database somewhere from grants that have been given out, money that's been awarded in the past, or?
TEO stakeholder list.
It'd be interesting to know, what other groups that's sitting outside of what's listed here to identify was there people missed, or people didn't uptake. A couple of things that, from reading over the documents in the programme for government, that was concerned. One of the main things was the protocol. It's obviously not listed anywhere, and it's a major thing for businesses in Northern Ireland. And I'm wondering to myself, was there the business community, did they not engage, did they not feed into the consultation process, or was it a minimal response on that issue? One of the things I was certainly looking at was more commitment for Intertrade UK. Nothing there in the budget. A line in the programme for government, can't see anything in any of the consultation responses, but I think it's a massive glaring missed opportunity that when we have the Irish language community with LGBTQ plus different ones mentioned there, I'm wondering, is there a whole section of business and a whole section of unionism that has been overlooked in some of this and haven't come forward to feed into the consultation responses?
Just because I think there were meetings with business representatives. The Chamber, CBI breakfast comes to mind that the ministers attended, but I think there were others as well.
IOD.
Yeah.
I wouldn't categorise it as businesses being underrepresented in this at all. I think they had the same opportunity, and I think we got some very useful stuff.
Yeah, and also I think it's page 85 of the programme for government itself does make references to supporting, enterprising and maximising trade with Great Britain, Ireland, the rest of the European Union and beyond. So it may not be mentioned explicitly by name, but I think the spirit of the document.
There's a reference to it, but certainly something that's raised in the Chamber this week where I'm very disappointed that because of the impact of the protocol, the Intertrade UK hasn't been put on the same footing, or at least some sort of a financial footing. Is really in the shadow of Intertrade Ireland, and that as all the bells and whistles in Intertrade Ireland or UK is meant to survive on fresh air. If possible, could I move back to some of the stuff from last week that we were covering? Obviously the budget is still out for consultation. Some more information has become available. I look back at the childcare. So the figure that's in the budget is the figure that's in the programme for government is the one up to the end of March this month. Next year is the 50 million. The Finance Minister said in the Chamber the other day that there's a further 5 million has been committed in a future monitoring round. But it still leaves me with, there's 2.2 million of a Barnett consequential that came for childcare that hasn't been spent in childcare. And to date, from probing the different ministers, nobody seems to be able to answer where that money has went or what has been more of a priority than childcare itself. And on the back of the questions last week, is there any more clarity within the TEO office?
I would just say, if I can clarify, that the Barnetts are generated by an issue. So the Barnett is generated by childcare, comes in, and if it's not ring fenced, it's allocated in the normal way. But you can see from that the vast majority is actually going to childcare. I think because you've asked us twice now about that missing, as you say it, 2 million, we'll have to go to DOF and see if they can get you a response.
Why would 5 million of that be ring fenced for a monitoring round and not put in at this stage?
I wouldn't be aware of how that came about.
That's obviously committing to something before it happens. And it's something that concerns me. I get the budget's out for consultation, I get there's headroom, but at the same time, it just doesn't make sense to me. If there's 57.2 million has been given for childcare, and if it's not being spent in childcare, I would want to know where the other money has been spent on.
Sorry, just interrupt. Roisin has emailed the Dallow about a departmental briefing on the budget.
Yeah.
So maybe some of that might be, if you could hold that back maybe for next week. But you did give a commitment there that you would go to.
Yeah,
finance.
but because the information may not be in our department, Chair.
Yes, that's what I mean. So, but I think that we're straying a wee bit into more the budget as opposed to the programme itself.
You had mentioned, if possible, departments leading delivery of commitments. So is that a case of all the money, there's only a certain amount of figures have been inputted into the programme for government? I'm thinking of childcare, I'm thinking of health especially. So really got over ground from last week. Is the expectation that for health that Mike Nesbitt finds that money within his own budget? So I get there's a collective, everybody's signed up to the principles, we're going to get this money, but from different questions and different answers that have come, we're still at a position where nobody seems to know where the money's actually coming from to fund the commitments in here.
I think somewhere in the papers, and I'm not going to be able to find it, we do have a phrase in around not everything that the ministers want to do has money attached to it at the moment, but we would expect that as a starting point, departments will fund the commitments that they have included. Mr Nesbitt's is worded though very carefully around needing executive support, so that one will just need to be looked at. Mr Nesbitt will make his own strong case, I think was the words I used last week.
I'm conscious on you still just...
And the final one then, just to pick up, policing still no further forward. Nobody seems to be able to give clarity on new decade, new approach, 7,500 officers. I don't understand why that figure, that reference to new decade, new approach would be put in when there's not a figure attached to it, which gives the minister wriggle room. And the last thing I really have a concern about is the housing commitment. From speaking to, asking questions of DFC and Department for Infrastructure, I think we're staring at a place here where we put a programme for government together, it's all singing, all dancing, comes across great, the executive parties are out, promoting their positive message, which you would expect them to do. But the real key is here, how are we financing this? And nobody collectively, Finance Minister, you name it, has been able to turn around and say, we have a pot of money coming, or this is where we're getting any of this money to fund the vast majority of the stuff that's in this, over and above of what they have within their budget. And when you said departments leading delivery of commitments, gives the impression to me that picking up on health and not to pick on the minister, that's what you've asked for, there's your budget, you deliver on it from your own resources.
The agreed wording on that in the programme for government is with executive support. That's what it says in the document. And I want to say again just how committed my ministers are to working with Mr Nesbitt on health reform. On the police numbers, I didn't go back and look at that in any meaningful way, because I think Mr Dixon suggested that you table a question.
I've done, yeah.
Thank you.
But finishing off, really concerned. There's simply not the money to deliver on some of this. And without the money, without delivery, the executive will be judging this in 2 years' time. And there's a pot of gold found somewhere. There's a lot of this is very aspirational, and it's setting the programme for government up for a fall.
Right, thank you. Anya, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Karen and Louise and Christine for coming back into us this week. Karen, you had mentioned, I'm actually glad to hear that we had such high numbers in attendance at Enniskillen within my own constituency. And a note on page 2022 when it gets into the draft RNIA and some of the issues that have been highlighted. I suppose, can you expand on some of the consultation responses that have been submitted by rural residents?
Would you mind?
Yep. Yes. So I have a summary here. So they were saying among the written responses is just a summary. Obviously, there's probably a lot more. The needs of rural citizens to be incorporated into all priorities. A more thorough understanding in the RNIA of rural community needs around housing, poverty, employment, tourism, transport, and including rural proofing in it, and considerations around regional balance as well, and about more detail proposed around policies and commitments. So that was the summary of the rural, yes, that came out of that.
Consensus. No, that's okay, Christine. And I suppose within the draft rural needs impact assessment, and I think it notes in paragraph 75, similar to the draft EQAA, it found potential for impact and certainly potential for a positive impact. However, there's no mention of any possible negative impacts included in that at all.
Yeah.
Has there been any identified at all?
Let me just add that too, sorry. I think for rural, let me just double check, sorry.
Take your time.
It was very mixed in the rural, we said. Now, we did, for specifically in the rural, there was 8 respondents felt that the draft PFG would have a positive impact, and there was 7 felt to be negative, so there was that as well, and then 5 felt there'd be no impact. There wasn't a high number in that, obviously, but there was a range of issues addressed, and it was mainly around the access to services.
Yeah, and that's across the board, whether it's transport, health.
Yes, it says education as well.
And in relation to, and I know Karen touched on this point with me last week, around the actual delivering departments, it's up to them essentially to plot a path for policy and abide by rural proofing fully at that stage. Yes.
Yes. Each individual policy will have to do their own rural needs when needed. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Anya. I just want to get back on a point that Timothy made, and it was around the consultee list. I think you mentioned there was 20,000 went out. Is there an exercise up and coming around opening that out again and asking, because there's some new groups appear, and other ones, close. Is it executive office's responsibility, or, as you say, is it the department send their lists? I'm just conscious that there is the potential for people not to be included in the consultation for this or other things.
It's definitely something we can look into, but as I said, we did go out to departments as well.
Yes.
So
I'm not disputing that. I just think that maybe just
definitely,
updated.
See if people are missed. Yeah, we really did try to capture everyone, but I know I'm sure there was.
Yeah, but even just a call for groups to
definitely.
Maybe in this sort of slightly quieter time now that the full consultation's over.
No.
Go ahead.
Just on that, I'd be very supportive if we did put out a call. Thinking of a number of groups that have been in front of us before that have said they haven't been invited to take part in different things, women's rights. We have a letter in front of us from the Free Presbyterian Church who felt that they weren't invited into our inquiry, so it would be important that groups like that, even if they're not on our database, that they're appearing somewhere. There is something sent to them to ensure that when it comes to programme for government or any strategies, they get the invite to take part.
I think it's a good idea to refresh the list.
Yes. There's a role for us as elected reps as well to tell people that we're sorry, Karen.
But Louise has just reminded me that we had adverts in newspapers as well, so it's back to that design point. Let's use as many avenues of getting to people as we can, but we will take that action back.
Just based on the newspapers, if you look at how many people came in person and how many people came online, it's obviously the online, there's still a place for the newspaper, the local newspaper, but the online avenue, you'll reach far more people.
Yes.
And there needs to be a database centrally that a department has control over, whether it's the executive office or who else. That
these sort of things. Okay, well, thank you very much, ladies.
you.
Really appreciate your time again
Yeah.
this week, and
Thank you
good luck
very
in the
much.
months ahead with the work. There's a lot in front of you.
Well, I'm back here in 2 weeks, but on something completely different, which is civil contingency.
Oh, yes.
So I'll see you then.
We
I almost
discussed
talked
it.
about that earlier.
Yeah.
Maybe asking questions.
Any update in the delivery hub that'll be progressing? You know how this is moving forward. We were talking about bringing them to committee.
Yes. Do you want to speak to that?
It is
Ladies, that's fine. You just can leave. Thank you.
It is just to say that the delivery hub, although it's been established, it's not up and running yet. It's at a very, very early
Okay.
stage. So I will
Okay.
correspond with the department and ask them whether they have officials that could come and talk to us about what they plan, even if they're not ready to deliver at this point. And we'll schedule it in the coming weeks so that we can follow up with this as part of integrating programme for government work into the committee's forward work programme as a regular item.
And SIB as well, Roisin, where does it fit in terms of, so Delivery Hub appreciates for the PFG, but certainly SIB in terms of the infrastructure, capital, you know, even trying to get the right people and at the right time in the right place, so.
Sarah Ann and I this morning had a look at the key areas of the department and what briefings you've had so far from those and what ones we haven't heard from. And we looked at the department's first 100-day statement checklist, and we're cross-referencing the checklist against the key areas of the department, against the briefings you've had so far. They'll be in the packs going out on Friday with some suggestions as to how we would then integrate those into kind of priorities and then routine streaming. But just we're looking at some dates. So when we do the strategic planning next week, we'll do two things. One, revisit the priorities that you established in May last year, and two, look at then how to integrate those standing items into a longer term programme that will kind of put, like, if you like, a spine through the forward work programme. But in the next couple of weeks, if before the summer, definitely.
Yeah, because I think we were also speaking about our own scrutiny work around the mother and baby institutions bill and stuff, so I do think we need to be very strategic about our time going forward. Look, members, I was thinking of we will suspend the meeting for 5 minutes for a short comfort break, and just for those people who are watching online, we will be resuming in 5 minutes, but it will be in closed session because we're going to be hearing evidence from the birth mothers and their children for justice. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we're back in open session again. Just for those people who have been waiting for us to come back on, we just had a very powerful session with some representatives from the birth mothers and their children for justice, as almost a precursor to our formal consultation that will come forward when we have the bill around the public inquiry and redress scheme into the mother and baby institutions. Okay, members, so we're going to move on with our agenda now. So correspondence, so you'll find a summary of correspondence on page 400 to 406. And I want to draw your attention to a number of items. 8.2 Ofcom, Online Safety Act, refer members to page 407. This correspondence has been received from Ofcom regarding the Online Safety Act and practical guidance to create safer online environment for women and girls. So the committee team has gone back to Ofcom to request further information on the consultation, including the format, how to submit evidence and whether they are holding any engagement events. Ofcom has also been asked if they have contacted any other Assembly committees regarding the consultation. So, members, I would just ask you to note this correspondence and seek your agreement to consider this item further once a reply has been received from Ofcom. Okay?
Yeah.
So 8.3 compensation payments, and this leads into what we've just heard. The committee has been copied into correspondence from the Committee for Communities to the Executive Office regarding the effect of compensation payments under the Republic of Ireland's Mother and Baby Institutions Payment Scheme on means-tested benefits. Members, I would ask you to note this correspondence and seek your agreement to consider this item further when this committee is copied into the TO reply. Yep. Okay, there's an invitation on page 403 from the Children's Law Centre for a lecture, just to note that. And then there's some correspondence at page 415 from the Northern Ireland Policing Board around historical institutional abuse. So the Policing Board has sent a response to the committee in relation to questions surrounding historical institutional abuse. The committee previously agreed to direct these queries to the PSNI and PPS. However, they indicated they do not hold the required information, so the committee then directed them to the Policing Board. You'll recall some of this. The Policing Board has now indicated that they have raised the matter with the PSNI and recently been advised that it is the PSNI's intention to respond to the committee. So I just want you to note that, correspondent, and seek your agreement to consider this item further when we receive the response from the PSNI. Okay, so page 422, International Agreements Committee. We've received correspondence from the UK International Agreements Committee from the House of Lords that they're visiting the Assembly as part of its work on treaty scrutiny, exploring issues such as international agreements, international trade and interparliamentary relations. This visit is due to take place on Wednesday the 7th of May and they do hope to meet with the committee. So the Committee for the Economy is working to arrange an informal meeting with the International Agreements Committee at 1 p.m. that day. Obviously we've got our committee at 2. And I would just want to know, are you content to note the invitation and then seek agreement when we get that? Okay, so other pieces to note: the Executive Office forwarded information in terms of the rights, identity and language appointments, page 423 of your pack. So they wrote to the committee to update members that ministers have now agreed the role profiles and personnel specifications, appointment plans and draft advertisements to enable the competition for the appointment of the Director and other members of the Office of Identity and Cultural Expression, the Irish Language Commissioner and the Commissioner for the Ulster Scots and Ulster British Commission. And this correspondence was emailed to you on the 6th of March. So I'm asking you to note it and to seek your agreement to write to the department to ask for clarity on the recruitment process, how long the process will last, and request that the committee is kept updated on this competition. I just want to raise, there was a question in that correspondence around unregulated appointments. Did you see that phraseology?
An absence of a commissioner? Yeah,
I'm just wondering then just if they can just clarify that. Okay, so the next one then is obviously good news that the Commissioner for Older People has been appointed, and just like you to note the press release, and if with your agreement we'll issue a letter of congratulations to the new Commissioner on behalf of the committee. Agreed. Right. And that an introductory meeting with the new Commissioner be added to the Forward Work Programme. Okay. So, Committee for Finance Budget Sustainability Plan, you'll find this on page 431. And the Department of Finance have indicated that the 5-year business plans for departments have been asked to develop, will include anticipated costs, and that the Department of Finance will produce a best estimate of block grant funding. This will not be an indicative budget, but it should aid understanding around any potential gaps between anticipated costs and estimated available funding. It is anticipated that the Committee for Finance will be provided with a copy of guidance when formally commissioned. So I'm asking members to note this item for correspondence and to seek agreement to write to the Department to ask that they send a copy of the 5-year TEO business plan to the committee once it has been formalised. Okay, so I just ask you to note the other correspondence, but if anybody wants to speak to any of it, if you want to.
I would be keen after that High Court challenge on 31st of March, just in terms of CPD, because there's a lot of challenges in procurement.
Oh yes.
And all it needs is somebody to challenge it and it can hold the whole project up. So, but I mean, listen, we'll probably hear about it in the news, so don't worry about it.
Anything else under correspondence?
The letter we have on our desk.
Oh yes.
Discussing it.
So there's a letter from Reverend Gordon Dean, convener of Free Presbyterian Government and Morals Committee, querying why his denomination was not invited to the Long Gallery event held as part of the committee inquiry into gaps in equality legislation. This letter and a draft response has been tabled in hard copy for members' consideration. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, it's just in the response. I think it's important that it's raised today. We've already touched on it earlier on, that we're going to update any database we have, and I think we need to give an assurance in the response that the organisation has been added, and that if we are doing further calls in the next phase, that he will receive an invite to give evidence. But I do agree that they are invited to submit their evidence in written form, and that can form part of the inquiry.
Yeah, I suppose every week under the update on gaps in equality legislation reading up to this, I did say, does anybody know any other groups and stuff? But I think if we had a more formalised list of consultees then going forward, certainly as part of that inquiry, but maybe any subsequent ones, then we could make it as comprehensive as possible. So do you want to speak to the response then? What the suggested response is?
There's a draft letter on the table. Yeah. Are members content with the way that's drafted? Are you content to issue it?
Yeah.
Do you want feedback?
If you could add into it that when we talk about moving to the next phase, and if there is further opportunities, that they are now on our country
absolutely.
list.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah. Okay, anything else under correspondence? No. Okay, forward work programme on page 432. So we have a strategic planning session next week, and just want to seek your agreement that we hold this. I think we talked about in a formal session about the format of it. Really, do you want to speak to that, or you think that's fine?
I can just say it very quickly, which is we're planning to have a session next week. So in advance of that, we will send a packet of papers, which will be the department's first 100-day checklist against what we've had briefing on, again, and also identifying what the committee agreed was their strategic priorities in May. We're going to have a look at that and see what progress we've made against the strategic priorities and the other key things that are in that, and then to look at then programming that out to the summer and potentially framework programming it, certain things to be recurring standing items. So we'll look at all of that next week in the strategic planning session, and it's not an item of committee business, so we will conduct whatever business we need and close and do the strategic planning session, and then we can report back on that strategic planning through the forward work programme at the next committee meeting.
Perfect, thank you. Thanks for all your work on that. Okay, members, any other business?
Just before you go off, is
go
it possible to get the First and Deputy First Minister scheduled, if possible, or not? It's a TBC, where they haven't been here since September, October, and that was in the back of, the committee was mainly taken up with other issues that were going on at that time, and if possible, if we could get them back regarding programme for government, budget and other functions, it would be.
I think that next week when we look at the strategic planning, we can identify the issues we'd like to ask them to come to the committee about and ask to put those things into the forward work programme and make requests at that point.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, we can certainly scrutinise any minister on the bids they make, but we can't scrutinise another minister on another minister's department. So it's about finance. Why was those bids made? Why were other priorities not? It's those sorts of things. But again, we can talk about those next week.
Yeah.
How many times over the year should the minister come in front of the committee? Is it every quarter?
I'll ask you to. I don't know, because my last committee was during the health pandemic and carried on, so the health minister was there very regularly, so I think it depends on the circumstances and the size of the department, but please.
I have nothing really to add to that.
Okay.
I think it does depend on the nature of the topics and what's going on in the department. Otherwise, there isn't from a procedural point of view, there isn't a rule of thumb in relation to this procedurally. It'll be for the committee to discuss and agree with the relevant minister.
So we could do that next week then as part of the discussion.
Yep. Okay, members, any other business? No?
No, thank you.
Okay.
It was a good bit of work a day. Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody. Same time, same place next week. Thank you. We're now going to close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies have just left in the room.
Thank you very much.